Well, moving forward in a new era and with resilience. Let's get back to my guests now in studio. Mr. Sim, Lawrence Wong, during his speech, talked about moving forward. He said, we're a little red dot. We are exposed to the world and its challenges as well. But he also said that tenacity, we do have the tenacity to turn these big dreams into reality. That's always been at the essence of what Singapore is. The finance minister outlining there that there is hope for Singapore beyond the rhetoric in this hyper-competitive world, is there?
Certainly. If you look at what is happening in Singapore today, as an economy, we are still doing very well. Of course, the competition will intensify. And we continue to want to bring in foreign companies to invest. But concurrently with that, even as we are bringing the companies, I think the companies will be looking for talent that can support their operations. If that is not the case, then maybe Singapore would not be the best location. So we want to enable companies to bring in the best talent. But even as they do so, what we also want the companies to do is to transfer those capability to locals. So there are capability transfer programs that the government continues to support so that locals can build up the new skills. And then of course, that is an ongoing cycle, right? Even as we go into new areas and new growth areas, we attract new companies to come in. They will bring in new talent, and that whole process of building up our local talent pipeline so that we continue to have good jobs for Singaporeans is something that we will want to continue to do. So investment in upskilling of our workforce, investment in reskilling our workforce continue to be an important initiative that the government continues to support.
Dr. Mathews, our workforce has got to have the right skills and capabilities if those companies are going to come here, if they're going to choose Singapore as their base. As an example, that's always been in competition, and it's getting increasingly more so in this region. How much more does Singapore have to raise its game in order to attract these companies in the manner in which the finance minister is suggesting we need?
Well, we need Singaporeans and the workers to be agile, very competitive, and also very creative. There's some added advantages that we have in Singapore in terms of how the Singaporeans have developed, have learned, have gone through school, have gone through a system by which I think they've built up a sense of capability. There's been a lot of infusion of all kinds of human resource capability. And I think those things will stand out when I think global employers think about Singapore as a base. But not just that, I think also looking at Singapore, you're coming in to do business in Singapore. They have a kind of environment which, of course, is also welcoming to foreign talent who are here. The fact that the Singaporean knows how to work well with that foreign talent, be able to work in a cohesive way. The Singaporean worker also being able to, not just be contained in Singapore, but be willing to, which many global companies want to do. They branch out of Singapore, want to make sure that the worker who they train here is able to support the regional businesses that they have around. So I do think some of the skills that Singapore is trying to instill in our workers, both younger and mid-career, I think those will go a long way.
But there have always been these fears about the potential brain drain. If you have talented individuals here go overseas, will they come back as well? The government treads a fine line as far as this is concerned. Your thoughts on
maybe from the perspective that, quite apart from the economic angle, I think one of the things that the government continue to do is to get Singaporeans to feel rooted to Singapore and to see Singapore as home. So with that concurrent effort, actually we should be less concerned about Singaporeans venturing overseas. Indeed, even as we have more regional and global companies coming to set up base here, and if we want Singaporeans to be able to take on leadership position in those companies, then the fact that our Singaporeans do have regional and global experiences will be very important. Because without that, it will be likely that they may not be the best candidate to take on the more senior roles.
Right.
So we do want to continue to encourage companies to be thinking about sending our Singaporeans overseas for exposure. So from the company perspective, that is one point. But then actually the other perspective is from the workers' perspective. I think our workers need to be more ready to get out of the comfort zone. It is recognized that Singapore is, as a country, is very comfortable. And so when it's too comfortable and the desire to then try something a bit different may be a little bit lacking. So we think that maybe we can start by exposing the younger workers earlier. Because one of the concerns that most workers have would be when they set up family, what is the possibility about the spouse in terms of their career development. If they have children, then of course the education will be one other concern that most families have. So if they go out young, get exposure, maybe bite that bug to want to explore more, I think that would be a good thing for Singapore.
And Dr. Mathews, the competition for this talent, it is intense. I mean, there used to be a time decades ago when if you were a Singaporean and you went overseas, the idea of being a first-class citizen, you were warned, it's not there. Be prepared to be treated differently. Now we're seeing countries as far as Canada and Australia as well, neighboring countries, just throwing open the doors and saying, come here, and the benefits are immense. It's a huge draw.
Well, to start off with, I think we shouldn't be looking that, especially if our younger Singaporeans are venturing abroad with all this, that necessarily we have completely lost. I do believe that, also when you think about aspirations today, I think people do aspire sometimes to go overseas, to spend some time, very often knowing that they plan to return, but they hope that they can build some kind of skill, talent, ability, some things that you may not be able to build in Singapore directly. There will be other opportunities elsewhere, different kinds of backgrounds, cultures, work cultures, for instance, and coming back to Singapore with that. So I don't see this so much as a brain drain so much if we ensure that Singapore as a society always has that environment which one will be able to absorb you back when you come back, in terms of it wouldn't be a demerit for you if you have children, if you start a family overseas, to come back, to get back in our education system and all that. It would be easy to navigate some of that. If you have that, and also the sense that as a society, we do have some of the aspirations and the goals that our people have. It's not something that Singapore is, it used to be everybody would look at Singapore as just being this economic, material-driven society. But today, as DPM was articulating that, this is a society which cares about being fair, inclusive, gracious, harmonious, many of the principles which people might feel drawn back because in some other parts of the world that may not be the reality, and it's something that Singapore provides.
Mr. Sim, when you look at Singapore's targeted strategy to woo these elite professionals to Singapore, what are some of the things that you worry about? Some of the possibly potential side effects of that, negative side effects that may occur?
Okay, actually, I don't see the side effect as a negative because one of the things that will happen is that we believe that diversity strengthens us, right? And so when we are able to have diverse talent, then it's a question of how do we leverage on that diversity to give us strength. And it's also from the perspective of mindset, right? What is the mindset of our workers, right? And I think if our mindset is that we have the best in Singapore so that I have the best to learn from, then I think we will definitely become better. So that's something that I believe that we must continue to embrace. Earlier you mentioned tenacity, the ability, the can-do spirit. We know that together we can become stronger, and then becoming more embracing and more welcoming, so that as a whole, because Singapore is a very heterogeneous society, multicultural, and we have lived as a heterogeneous society for so many years, right? It is something that is inbuilt. I think it's a strength that we have.
Many years ago, founding Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew said in one of his, or maybe several of his speeches, that Singapore doesn't have very many resources. The people are its sole resource, really, and their work ethic. Now we see, our workforce more heavily populated with people from all over the world, and people who are choosing to become permanent residents, to become Singaporeans as well. You talk about the social compact that Lawrence Wong referenced, and I think to ordinary Singaporeans, they may wonder, what is the social compact? That agreement between government and the people to basically know their role and contribute. Dr. Mathews, insofar as this competition for talent is concerned, though, and being able to see more foreigners here in Singapore, amid what we know to be, it's an unpopular topic, this rise of anti-foreigner sentiment. We're not just seeing it in Singapore, we've seen it elsewhere as well. How important is it that this social compact, the resilience of Singapore, is something that is bought in by every Singaporean?
Well, to start with, I think it begins with Singaporeans feeling confident, confident that when they're in Singapore, Singapore does take care of them. I think that's what the budget 2023 has kind of highlighted. All the different kind of schemes and measures, everything to make sure that as a Singaporean, as you're here, you don't have to worry that, or get so caught up that housing will be completely unaffordable or everything would just, become so difficult for you to achieve if you are not, for instance, on the top of the income ladder and you have got transfer mobility. So when people have that understanding, that security, that you have a society which backs you up, which gives you opportunities, then you get less concerned about the incursion of or what you would consider as an incursion of a foreigner. You'll be able to see them as, look at it very, very differently, recognize the fact that they do bring in certain kind of talent. And I think it's important for us also to realize that many who come in to Singapore today, especially after the pandemic, they realize, Singapore has been top on many of the charts in terms of how countries have handled the pandemic. And so they come with a certain kind of respect for what has been achieved in Singapore. That years ago, people always kind of think about their own society and reference it. But today, I think people begin to see that the Singapore model is delivered, is done well. And so I think they're a lot more willing to learn, find out, be, in some way or another, assimilated in some way or another into the Singapore way of doing things. I think that would help our Singaporean worker feel that, hey, they're people here who believe the same things, who can buy into the Singapore vision. I think as long as we can keep that going, I think this does very well and kind of root out the fact that this is always an us and them type of mentality.
Mr. Sim, have you seen in this budget a good balance by the finance minister in being able to juggle those two needs, to support the local labour workforce, as well as, kind of calibrate carefully this idea of how important it is for Singapore to have that resilience?
Yeah, I think it's quite a good balance. There is focus. So, for example, the senior employment credit to support the seniors, enabling credit to support person with disability, as well as supporting the person's ex-offenders to be able to gain employment. Right. So maybe wearing a little bit of my previous hat with the National Council of Social Service, I think we do believe that we want to enable every person to live a life of dignity and the ability to be independent, to be engaged actively in society is something that would be quite empowering. So all the measures that are supporting the vulnerable groups will be very useful. So that's one. Second, the broad base. The broad base is that if you look at the changing economic system that we have, new areas that we need to go into, green economy, care economy, digital economy, I think uplifting and upskilling our workers so that they are able to seize opportunities in these new areas of the economy would enable our Singaporean workers and locals to gain better jobs, good jobs. So those are things that I think the government continues to place emphasis on, and that's quite critical. And of course, if you think about it, the government supports the individual, and the government is also supporting business, because the businesses are finally the one that provide the employment opportunity. So businesses today are faced with challenges around higher business costs as well as manpower issues. So a lot of the issues around manpower, training, etc., and of course helping with some of the costs that businesses are seeing will be useful.
Yes. Dr. Mathews, the finance minister made clear this idea that Singapore must stay open to the world. These are narratives that we have heard previously. He also referenced how populism, economic nationalism, they have kind of stained that imperative. In many areas of the world, we haven't been spared that either. We need to get to the root of the fact that we're not immune to it. That's a challenge to be able to do in one budget. I mean, we're seeing each budget build on the next. Do you anticipate that we are going to continually see this as a feature in budgets going forward?
No, definitely. I think when you think about populism that happens all over, I think it comes from that place where people are not assured about, the future, and you don't have a very clear notion about the fact that, there are good plans. So sometimes you might have to take some amount of bitter medicine. Sometimes you may not be able to get everything that you want, but there's a longer-term plan which will be able to take care of you, uplift you, which will do better for society in general. So if people can continue to have that broader plan and think about the bigger picture, and of course that requires within the budget, the government, to be able to share that vision in a very compelling way. I think once you have that, I think when you have that kind of assurance, some of the concerns about populism become less and less real. I think people do, rise up to recognize the bigger picture and the fact that, their contributions and they're working towards seeing that bigger reality is so much part and so important.
Maybe just to add that I think DPM also mentioned about focusing on this issue around social mobility, ensuring that, even if today I'm not doing as well, but precisely the idea that my future generation will do better, because we ensure that we continue to support everybody and to ensure that there is social mobility. I think that gives hope to everyone.
Sim Gim Guan and Dr. Mathew Mathews, thank you very much.